Welcome to everyone again. My name is Elena Gutierrez. I am the director of the Mexico-US program for global exchange, and it is a pleasure for me and truly to be able to have the plurality of voices that we have this afternoon. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the report that we are presenting this afternoon, which is a common effort between the Latin American Migration Bloc and the monthly migration meeting of the People's Movement for Peace and Justice. And I'll take you a moment to explain that People's Movement for Peace and Justice is a binational movement bringing together movements from the U.S. and Mexico that has four platforms, and one of them is the platform on migration. It's a binational platform that brings together organizations, shelters, people who work on the issue of migration on both sides of the border, the US-Mexico border, and in collaboration with the bloc, which is a much larger space and that brings together voices from around Latin America, we have created this report that we're going to be presenting today. So I want to start by also presenting Berenice Valdez Rivera, who is going to be moderating together with me this panel, in which we had decided to have as a relaxed chat around migration issues and about what we are presenting in the report. Berenice is a human rights defender, and she is the representative for the Latin American Bloc on Migration. Thank you for all of your efforts, Berenice, and for being present with us this afternoon. And also from Brazil, we have Federico Fornazieri, who is the representative of CAMI, the Center for the Pastoral Center for Support for Migrants in Sao Paulo, and he's also a member of the Latin American Bloc with over 20 years of experience, both in the public sector as well as in civil society organizations and issues related to human rights and the regional integration and the borders and migration. Welcome, Federico, and thank you. And also from Honduras, we have Indira Ríos, who is a social activist and a poet, and she is part of the the international diaspora of Honduras and part of the Latin American Bloc on Migration. She's the coordinator of the holistic program on migration of the Mennonite Social Action. And I'm also presenting my colleague from Mexico and the United States, Camilo Perez Bustillo, who is the coordinator of the International Tribunal of the Consciences of the Peoples and part of Witness on the Border. Welcome, Camilo. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Alberto Chicoteca Carrasco, who is a psychologist. He is Mexican. He is in Saltillo in the northern part of Mexico on the border between Mexico and the United States, close to Texas. And he has been working for 20 years with migrants and refugees in the north and south of Mexico. And he currently is the director of the Migrant House in Saltillo, and which is in the state of Coahuila. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to pass the microphone to Bere to tell us a little bit more about this joint effort, where it's coming from. Thank you. Go ahead, Bere. Thank you so much, Elena, and thank you very much to each one of you. It's really a luxury to be here with all of our colleagues who in this roundtable discussion, as well as behind all of these efforts. And this report is coming out of these spaces that Elena has commented. The majority of the defenders, the migrants, and the organizations are grassroots organizations that have been working for a long time, documenting and supporting and accompanying people who are in mobility with their families, with their communities. And so we've had a lot of reflection meetings. Last year was a really difficult year, more as a very difficult year, as many people are aware. And the rich thing is right now we're going to be able to share from our daily work, from so many years of struggle, how we are carrying these things out, how we are looking at our territories, beyond the general craziness that we're hearing from about some governors and what is changing in Latin America. And I think there's a really rich space because we are hearing from the people from all over the Americas, from Canada down to Patagonia, and we are carrying out shared analysis. I think that is part of the great richness, and what we have reflected on together is shared in the report, and they are voices, they are echoes of the people who we accompany and what we live and what we face. And above all, this report, what we are trying to do is, yes, to systematize and document this experience, this historical memory, but also to remember this action that we have been in resistance for a long time and we're going to continue. And how do we continue learning from each other? And from these bridges of solidarity that have been constructed have really been impressive, not just amongst the organized civil society or the populations of the communities, is being strengthened more and more through uh, as we face this storm and all of these policies, within this hemisphere, as things get more and more crude, how we can be seeds of life and of networks. I'm here with my colleagues, and please, those of you who are here, the people are connected in a lot of different ways through Zoom, through YouTube, Rompeviento, through Global Exchanges, social media, through the Latin American Network. Please feel that you are able to ask questions, to comments, to share, that this be a collective space. And in this context, we are having a conversation. We'll have a first round with our compañeras y compañeros who I really admire, who are here in this panel with so many stories from the struggle, and to share what is happening in this continent, because this is a continent that is really being hit by the current policies and what's happening in the US and Mexico and Brazil and Honduras. How is this toughening of policies affecting the families that we accompany, migrant families? And so we're going to start, if it sounds good to you, from south to north. And so we will start with Brazil. Go ahead, Federico, Fede.
Muchas gracias, Bere. Muchas
Thank
gracias
you very much,
por
Bere. Thank you
la
very much,
súper
Elena.
atención que el Global Exchange
And thank you
y
for
el
all
Bloc
the support and
Latinoamericano,
attention from
el
Global
trabajo que
Exchange and the
hicieron
Latin
para hacer
American
este
bloc, all the
reporte.
work that was
Fue
put
muy
in to
importante
create this report. It was
exactamente para
really
podernos
important.
reunir las
Exactly, to
diferentes
be able to come
perspectivas de los
together,
diferentes
to
países
bring
que
together all
tenemos
the different
distintas
perspectives from the
realidades que
different countries
reportar
with
en nuestra
distinct realities
Latinoamérica,
that
¿no?
we have throughout our Latin
Desde la
America.
perspectiva de Brasil,
And
también
from the
estamos
perspective
mirando
in
como cambios
Brazil, we're
estruturais
also looking
en la
at
apertura
structural
migratoria en
things
Sudamérica,
in
en América Latina en
migration
general.
in South America and Latin America in
Histórica de
general.
muchos países que están con gobiernos de derecha
There's
acá,
been a historical rupture.
quebrando la tradición de los acuerdos como la aplicación de los acuerdos de Mercosur,
There are a
de
lot of
residencia, los acuerdos de
right-wing
integración fronteriza que a
countries that
derechos
have been breaking
del
the agreements
laburo,
on,
de
on migration,
ocupación, de
of
salud, de
international
derechos
laws,
sociales. En
not
todos estos países
respecting
estamos en un retroceso.
the
Hemos
agreements on
descubierto
healthcare,
una ruptura
on
con
human
estos
rights.
tratados que teníamos muchos avances acá en
There's been a
Sudamérica y
rupture with, there had been
Latinoamérica,
a
como
lot of
las
advances in
definiciones de
South America
Cartagena,
and in Latin America.
regularizaciones migratorias
There had
amplias.
been a
Estamos en
lot
un grande
of
retroceso
regularization of
porque por la
migration
sanción de la
processes.
extrema
We're
derecha
seeing
que toman el discurso que viene desde los Estados
steps
Unidos
backward
por su articulación internacional, porque
as
están
there are
muy bien
countries that are
articulados.
taking on the
Hacen unos
discourse that
CEPACs,
comes
que son
from
reuniones de
the
la extrema
United
derecha
States. They
global,
are also
donde se
very
habla
well
Bukele,
networked
donde
and
se
they
habla
carry out
Bolsonaro
meetings
aquí
of
en
the
Brasil,
extreme right
donde estaba Trump
and where there
posiblemente
are
ser
um,
reelecto presidente.
where there
Entonces la
are different
extrema
leaders
derecha
from Brazil,
está
from other
articulada
countries,
con unas
Trump before he was
definiciones y
president. And
pautas
so
que no
the right
son,
wing
nunca fueron
is in
problemas
coordination.
y pautas problemáticas acá en
And so
Sudamérica, por ejemplo. Claro, la crisis de Venezuela generar un
There,
momento
we're
de
seeing,
bloqueo
yes,
impuesto
there
por
has been
imperialismo norteamericano contra un
a
país
lot of
soberano que
issues
generó
in
muchos de los problemas que
Venezuela
hoy
with
hemos
the
tenido con
blockade.
esta
There has
migración
generated a lot of the
intraregional
issues, a lot
hacia
of
Sudamérica.
the
Entonces
migration
estamos
throughout
mirando
South
algunos
America.
cambios,
And
incluso
so
aquí
we
en
are
Brasil,
seeing
con la
some
cuestión de la
changes even in
externalización de las
Brazil
fronteras, porque
with the
Brasil se volvió
externalization of
un hub
the
de
borders,
personas que quieren irse a Estados Unidos también, que vienen de
because
África
Brazil has
Oriental,
had also
empezó
many
este
people who
proceso con
want to go to the United States
una
who come from
dificultad mayor para estas personas
Afghanistan, from other
obtener una
places,
visa para venir a Brasil, visa
and
de
they'll get
refugio, porque desde el
visas,
comienzo
refugee
quedaban como
visas to
algunas
come
semanas,
to
meses,
Brazil, and they
a
would come and
recibir
stay
las
for
visas de
weeks or
tráfico
months
humano
and then
hacia
continue the
Estados Unidos.
migration routes
Entonces,
up to the
Brasil
United
sufrió mucha
States.
presión y
And so there's
cedió a la
been
presión,
a lot of
porque de
pressure.
acuerdo con la Defensoría Pública
And because
Federal
in
Brasileña,
accordance
este
with the
instrumento de que las
attorney
organizaciones sociales tienen que garantizar
Attorney General's
la
office in
acogida a las
Brazil,
personas
there's
migrantes o
it's
refugiadas que vienen de
important to
Afganistán, de países del
guarantee
Medio
the
Oriente o
rights
países que
of
están en conflicto,
refugees of
violan
who
los
come from
tratados, violan la ley
Afghanistan and for other
universal. Brasil tiene
countries
una ley
that are in
precisa.
conflict.
Brasil incluso
And
está
Brazil has
creando
received these
lanzó
people,
una
and
política nacional de
Brazil is
migración y
creating
refugio y patria, que es un
a
instrumento
national
fantástico
migration
con
policy
previsión de un
to
Consejo Nacional de
be able
Migración
to
donde los
receive
migrantes van a poder
refugees, to be able to
incidir
receive
directamente en las
migrations. It's a
políticas que
really
los más
incredible tool.
afectan.
And to
Entonces,
be able
son
to
instrumentos de avances, pero también
They are
tenemos
instruments
retrocesos. Creo que
that
Brasil,
are
dentro de
advances,
un
but we
contexto
also see
regional,
steps backward
bien,
as well. I
está muy
think
bien.
Brazil
Tenemos
within the regional
programas
context is
sociales,
doing
tenemos un
really
sistema de
well. We
salud,
have
educación
social programs,
universal,
we have
no importa la
universal
cuestión de
education
documentación,
and healthcare. It
de
doesn't matter
regulación
if you have
migratoria. Las
documentation to
personas
be
pueden
able to have
acceder a los
access.
sistemas
And so
públicos de salud,
even if
a los
people are
sistemas públicos de
undocumented
educación
migrants, they can
totalmente
have
gratuitos
access to
sin pagar
completely
nada.
free
Entonces, Brasil creo que sí tiene
education
una
and healthcare
perspectiva
system.
muy
And so I
buena,
think Brazil
pero
has a
están
really good
viviendo
perspective, but
muchos
we are
retrocesos y la
seeing
ascensión de la
a
extrema
lot
derecha. Nos
of
preocupa mucho que la extrema derecha
steps
vuelva a Brasil
backwards
también
within
a
the region
conocer la
as
migración
the
una pauta
ultra right
electoral.
really
Miremos Paraguay,
coordinates
miremos países
together
como Chile
their
ahora
narratives
que
and
sin derrocar
actions.
Milei en Argentina
And we
está
are seeing,
estrompando la pauta
Milei
migratoria. Creo
in
que una manera
Argentina and
que
others
promueve más
are taking
securitización en los
stances that
procesos de
promote
migración y
more
más
politicization
cierre a
in
derechos de las
migration
personas migrantes. Entonces, también nos
processes
preocupa
and that
mucho la ascensión de la
limit the
extrema
rights
derecha acá.
of migrants.
Bueno, después creo que podemos
And
hablar de
well, I
los,
think later we can
dejar fluir
speak about this
la
more.
acción de
We'll
otros
let the
países que podemos decir
conversation
muy
flow
sobre
here. There's a
Brasil,
whole lot more
el
that we could say
contexto
about
de
Brazil and the
Argentina, del
context of
Ecuador, el contexto
Argentina, of
electoral con las
Ecuador,
elecciones en muchos países
and
acá y
of
África
many
y Chile.
other
Entonces,
countries here,
seguimos tratando de
Chile.
ver por ahí. Por ahora,
So we'll continue
muchas
conversing.
gracias.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Fede. Y sí, este es justamente un gran
Thank you,
ejemplo de
Fede.
cómo
And yes, this is a great
incluyendo
example of
y
how,
promoviendo los derechos de las personas,
as we
el
include and
país gana,
promote
¿no?
the
Sin
rights
embargo,
of
como ya
people,
lo dijo
the
Fede, nos
country
preocupa muchísimo
gains
la
from this,
migración. Es
but
una
we are
preocupación
really,
fundamental
really
con la
concerned about the
coacción del
steps
gobierno de
backwards
Estados
at the
Unidos,
continental
con la
level,
extrema derecha
following the
que
lead of the
está
United States and of the
pues
extreme
creciendo,
right,
como ya
which
lo ha
is
comentado
growing,
Fede.
as Fede
Por
had
eso
commented,
tenemos que
and that's
articularnos y
why
por
we
eso
really
estamos
need to be
compartiendo
networked, and
estas
that is why
experiencias
we
emblemáticas
are
que platicamos
sharing
en el informe.
this
Y ahí nos
cross-border
pasamos a Centroamérica
conversation
con
that we
Indira
published in the
desde
report.
Honduras.
And now we will
Honduras que
go
ha
to
sido un país
Indira
muy
from
cercano a
Honduras,
México
a country
en la
that's very
migración
close to
en la
Mexico
última década y
in
más,
migration in the
y
last decade
también
and
con
more,
una historia de
and
lucha.
also with a
Indira
story of
da atención directa
organization
y
and
pues
struggle.
compártenos
And
cómo
yet,
está la situación en Centroamérica,
Indira
cómo
has
está la
direct
externalización
experience. Please tell us
y
about the
qué se está
experience
haciendo, por
in Central
qué este
America
ministerio se
and
está
what is
renovando
being
y cómo lo
doing,
ven las
and
Honduras
why
ahorita.
is
Sobre
the
todo, perdón, Indira,
hemisphere
pero sobre todo porque
okay,
acaban de tener
protect yourself.
elecciones
Well, and
recientemente
especially
y
because they
pues
just
Exacto.
recently
eso pues
had
cambia
elections,
hacia la derecha,
and
¿no?
so
Y
there's
hay
why there's
mucho
this
que
change
rascar.
towards the right, and so
Bueno,
there's a lot to hear about.
un gusto estar con todas
Well,
ustedes, compañeras,
it is a
compañeros.
pleasure to be
Bueno,
present
desde
with all of you,
aquí,
compañeros
desde
y
Honduras,
compañeras. And from here in
lamentablemente,
Honduras,
la coyuntura
unfortunately,
política que tenemos
the
enfrentado
current political context that
dio
we
ese
have
giro, como ya lo mencionaba Federico,
gave
hacia la
this
derecha.
turn, as
Y ahorita
Federico had
retoma
mentioned, towards
el
the
poder
right.
prácticamente,
And
vamos a decir que
now the power is being taken over once again, we will say not by the will of the Honduran people, but through various mechanisms, including fraud that was imposed through the National Electoral Council. And we have to say that in November, the 30th of November, we had elections here, and there was direct intervention of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, saying that the president that should win, or who the Honduran people should vote for, was Tito, the candidate of the most conservative party, and in fact, I mean, the ex-president of the of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, was imprisoned, and he's not innocent, but he was liberated by Donald Trump. And that there's a contradiction too of this anti-drug discourse that he has, and so that's where we see the power moving behind this, the de facto and political and economic powers. And on the 30th of November, the Organization of American States did not give any statements, and that is also very interesting because it was influenced before, during, and after the elections, and he kept insisting that this was his candidate and as one that needed to end up in power. And the National Party, which was the one that carried out atrocities after the coup in 2009, and there's this process of privatizing the Honduran lands and practically giving these lands away to international companies that then can implement their own laws in certain areas of the country. But there was this whole extreme neoliberal plan to privatize everything. And the very first day that the National Congress met, they're already talking about steps back in labor rights. There was a law that Xiomara Castro, who the previous president, had been able to take away, that they're planning on putting back in place, and also privatizing electricity. And there's also repression towards the social movement that's really concerning. There have been two emblematic figures from the party that was in the government who have been murdered. And just to kind of wrap up, with the issue of the phenomenon of migration, the Department of State in the United States said that Hondurans who were taking away the prosperity of the United States through remittances, and saying that it was like money that Hondurans were robbing and that we're sending back to Honduras. And that is a product of, they mentioned that there's like $5.8 billion that are being stolen from the US people, which is a completely false narrative with no basis. And the migrants have helped to contribute to building what United States is today. And the work of migrants is really important. And I also would like to point out here that in the intervention, intrusion into sovereignty of Honduras and the militarization, they are imposing the countries of Central America to be these third countries, these safe countries, but they don't have any protection for the migrant persons. And so this U.S. influence and intervention is really concerning. And also these policies of fear and of criminalization are also having big impacts, which was also one of the goals of the United States. And so I'll leave it there for the moment being. Thank you so much, Indira. And I just want to remind our audience who are listening to us that this panel is going to be here for an hour and a half. So we have plenty of time, because as you can see, there's just really a richness of and plurality of the voices of the people who are on the ground working directly all throughout Latin America. And I also want to say that in the chat, Corina has done us the favor of placing the links to the report. It is in English and in Spanish, and so you can look it up there and be able to take a look at it and see what we are proposing. And thank you so very much, Bere. Thank you so very much. And I would also like to share in to ask you to share in the chat your opinions, what things you agree with, what things you disagree with, and we're going to continue with Mexico, with Beto's part of the Migrants House and also part of the network for migrant rights in the northern part of Mexico and along the border with the US. And Beto, what is your view of this analysis? Good afternoon to everyone, and it's really a pleasure to meet everyone here and that you can be listening to us, interacting with us from the distance, and as you say, Bere, to be able to look at the complications the difficulties that we're facing in Mexico. Unfortunately, the situation is not better than what we're hearing from our companions, but what can I share with you? In Mexico, well, we have a government that apparently is a left-wing government, a government led by a woman president, which gave us really some very high hopes that things could be different, especially for sectors that have been most historically vulnerable. And however, unfortunately, although the narrative of the government continues to be pro-migrant and pro-human rights, in reality and in territory, it's the reality is not to respect human rights so closely. Mexico shows with the whole world all these continual threats from the President of the United States to place tariffs. And unfortunately, Mexico really depends on the economy of the United States and the economic treaties that it has with the United States. And so that really calls our attention, and we're also saddened at the same time. And we feel indignant as well that the economic negotiations take as a money, use people as a monetary exchange, and they really blame the migrant peoples. And so it seems, this rhetoric in which migrants are, cause the bad things at the national level, or that they cause the most complicated situations that North America is going through. There's been this unfortunate diffusion that it's because of is the fault of the migrant peoples. And what we understand at the end of the day is that the migration are the consequence of failed public policies that are completely irrespectful of the sovereignty of the countries. And at the end of the day, those people who pay the consequences are the people who have to move because they lose absolutely everything. They have to start over. And although they are the victims, there is a discourse, a narrative that gets created that they are the perpetrators and those who are responsible for all of the bad things at the regional level. And so when we face this reality and ask, well, how does this impact us in the day-to-day? On the House of Migrants, we are a shelter, and before the arrival of Donald Trump, we would attend to like 260 people every day. Right now, it's maybe 45, 50 people a day, and we would love to think that migration was reduced because the living conditions in the continent have changed and have improved. And I'm not going to say it as my compañeros and compañeras are saying how they're reading this moment in a continent which unfortunately is very distant from being better for people in general and in particular for the most vulnerable sectors who have to leave their countries and enter into this process that we call migration. And what we see have been entire families fleeing from violence that get stuck in a limbo because Mexico, although it has more flexible rules for for migration than in other countries, it also doesn't mean that in its totality really welcomes and shelters, or that regulates, certain good practices. It tries to regulate the migratory status, um, but there are more and more limits. And those people who have been able to get their migratory status, it has its distance when there's many people who are in limbo and who haven't, been able to um,
que no pueden llegar a Estados Unidos porque tenemos una frontera completamente sellada donde hay no únicamente aumento de murallas,
status
sino
or
que
who
hay
are
personal militar
stuck
de parte de
and
lados
trying to
estadounidenses,
get
también de
to the
parte del
United
lado
States, but
mexicano,
it's
convoyas,
there
¿no?
are
Tenemos
armed
historias
military on
terribles
the US
donde
side and
se
on the
quedan
Mexican
collas
side as well. We
colgantes
have really
muy
horrible
grandes
stories in which
donde la
there are
gente no
really
puede
large
atravesarlas,
floating
se han
buoys where
muerto
people are not
ahogadas,
able to
estas boyas
cross and
inclusive
they
paredes sin
die
techo
drowning.
que quedan por
And
debajo del Río
these
Grande para
buoys
cruzar a Estados
um,
Unidos o el Río Bravo como le decimos en
have
México,
nets,
donde la
that
gente dice,
are
bueno, pues si no puedo pasar por
people are not
arriba,
able
voy a
to.
nadar
People
y voy a
think like,
cruzar
okay,
por
well, if I
debajo.
can't go over top, I will
Desgraciadamente,
swim
pues la
down
gente se
and
encuentra con
cross
estas
underneath, but
redes.
they run into
Me parece
these
terrible porque
nets.
usamos
It
este
seems
tipo
really
de
horrible
redes
to me because we use these
para
kind of
el
tools
alimento y pescar peces.
for
Y es
to
terrible
feed
que usemos
ourselves,
estas
to fish,
herramientas
and so it's horrible to
para
use
pescar
these
seres humanos.
tools in order
Por
to
ejemplo,
fish for human
quiero
beings.
compartir la
And with
visión que
this,
estamos
I want
viviendo.
to, share with
¿Cómo
you
es
the
posible
abhorrent situations
que
that
una
we are
familia
living. How is
muera
it
atrapada en una
possible
red
to have a family that
como
dies
mueren
caught
los
in
peces
a net?
en el mar?
In a
Es
net like the fish die
completamente
in the sea.
inconcebible.
It's completely
Y cada vez que
inconceivable.
llegamos, el equipo,
And
¿no? Somos un
each
equipo
time
pequeño.
when our
Obviamente hemos tenido
team
que hacer
arrives,
cosas
we're
complejísimas
a small
en
team.
estos
Our
últimos
economic issues have
meses.
been really,
Es
really
cada vez más
challenging in
crítico
the
cuando llegamos.
last months,
Vemos
so we have
mujeres
a
que están
smaller and smaller team.
embarazadas,
But we
niños
would see women who
que
are
hacen
pregnant
con una caja de
and
cartón,
children
simulan un
who
coche
make,
o
with
niñas
a
y con
cardboard box, they
esto
simulate
intentan
a
recoger la
car,
infancia.
and with that, they try and recover
Pues es
their
doloroso el
childhood.
saber que es un
It's
futuro
painful
completamente
to
incierto,
know
que
that
es un
their
futuro que tampoco depende ni
future
del
is
papá ni de la
completely
mamá,
uncertain. It's a future that really
porque
doesn't
ellos
depend
y
on
ellas
the father
tienen
and mother,
el derecho
because
de
they have the
poder
right
planear
to be
su
able
proyecto
to
de vida,
plan their
porque
life
ese derecho se los han
projects,
arrebatado,
because
y saber que
that
ese
right
niño
has
o esa
been
niña que se
taken
traslada
away
y
from
juega con una
them,
caja de cartón sabiendo
and
que es un
that
auto,
this
pues
child
no
is
sabe
playing
si
with a
mañana
cardboard box and
estará o
pretending
no
that it's a
vivo,
car,
o si
and we
será
don't
uno
know if
separado de
tomorrow
su
that child
familia.
is going to be
Estas
alive or
políticas se
will be
traducen en una
separated
tragedia
from their
terrible
family.
para las
These
familias,
policies get
dejan en
translated into
incertidumbre
terrible
en un mundo
tragedy for the
atroz.
families. They leave them
Por
in
las noches las
uncertainty
mamás,
and
los papás despiertan
terrible
literalmente
fear.
gritando.
At night, the
Tenemos una
mothers
gran
and
cantidad de
fathers wake
personas
up
con
screaming.
depresión,
We
con
have a high
trastornos de
level of
ansiedad,
people who
que
are
tienen que empezar a
depressed, who
medicarse
have anxiety, who
psicológicamente
have to start to take
porque
psychiatric
perdieron la posibilidad,
medications because
me
they
parece esto
lost the
también
possibility.
fuerte, de
This is
la
also
posibilidad de
very, very
tener el
intense. They've
derecho
lost the
de
possibility
planear
of
su
having the
proyecto de
right
vida.
to plan
Y esas son las
their life
implicaciones que
projects. And
tienen estas
that
políticas públicas
is
restrictivas,
the
esta
impacts that these
externalización, porque
restrictive policies
México
have and this
lo
externalization of
replantea,
the borders,
somos una
because
gran frontera, una
Mexico and the
frontera
whole
que
continent become a
invierte
huge border,
recurso
a border
económico
that
humano para ayudar a
invests
personas
economic
en movilidad.
resources in
Y ya
order
para
to detain
terminar,
people
tú
who
comentas
are
que
in
México
mobility.
atraviesa
And
un
to
momento muy
to close, I
complejo.
said,
No es un momento,
Mexico is
llevamos ya
going through
varios
a really
años, más de
complicated
12,
moment.
con una
And
violencia
we
que
haven't
cada vez
for
cada vez se incrementa más,
a
donde
number of
hay
years, more than 12
enfrentamientos,
years, with
donde
the
la gente queda en medio
violence that
de
keeps
las vallas.
increasing, where there are
Y los cuerpos
confrontations
de
where people
seguridad
end up
pública
in the
mexicanos y
midst
de
of the
seguridad nacional,
bullets
pues hemos
and
visto, y esto
the
no
security
es
forces. We
meramente
have seen, and this is not
una
just
simulación, es real.
a simulation, this
Están
is
más que
true.
enfocados los
They
cuerpos de
are
seguridad pública
the
en
public
perseguir
security
personas migrantes,
focuses
en perseguir
are focused
familias, en
on
detenerles, en
persecuting
extortarles,
migrant
que
families and in
garantizar un
deporting
espacio de
them
seguridad
more than
en donde todos y
guaranteeing
todas podamos
their
vivir en paz.
security,
Entonces,
where all of us
justamente el
can live in
recurso
peace.
de las
And so
personas
they
que
invest
mantenemos este país y que es de
the
garantizar
resources of
seguridad
people
se
who
están utilizando y
maintain
empleando para
this country.
perseguir y
They use
detener
it not
a
to create
niños, a
security,
niñas, a
but to
familias
detain
que en
children, to
definitiva
detain families
no causan
who are not
ningún daño a la
causing
sociedad.
any kind of harm to society.
Muchas gracias, Beto. Muy importante es impresionante cómo tenemos que
Thank you
recordar
very much, Alberto. It's really incredible how we have to remind the communities, how we have to remind governments that we're talking about human beings, how this has to be part of our work when it should be taken for granted, and all of the implications that we see that you are sharing with us, all of the psychological impacts, the impacts on the lives of so many people, thousands of people, millions of people, families, communities. We're really breaking down the global social fabric, and also the impacts that we have as defenders, as accompaniers, as strugglers in this path, with every moment less guarantees of security of survival. And so it's important to remember this and to see how we can generate ways for humanity to share this view that you've shared to this, and this analysis that you've shared, and Indira and Fede in Latin America the peoples might come together. But we're seeing that the governments are becoming more and more aligned with the impositions of the United States. And this brings us to Camilo, who is a struggler, a member of movements, who has opened paths on the legal level, but also the social level. And please share with us, Camilo, from the United States about these reflections, what's happening to this hemisphere with this direction that things are going. Go ahead, please.
Camilo, perdón, tienes que activar.
Sí, muchas
Okay, you need
gracias,
to open your
Ana,
mic,
implica
Camilo.
un
Thank
honor
you.
que
Thank you
implica
very much. And it is such an
poder
honor
acompañar esta
to
mesa,
be
estas
able to
compañeras y
accompany
compañeros que
this round
hemos
table, these
escuchado. Mi
companions who we
respeto
have been
profundo
hearing to,
para
my
las voces que
profound
hemos
respect for the
escuchado y
voices that we have
lo que
listened to, and
la
for
resonancia, lo
the
que se
resonance
refleja en
that
esas
is reflected
palabras
in
y
these words
esa
and
sabiduría.
in this
Y
wisdom.
lo único que
And
puedo hacer es retomar
the
algunos
only thing
hilos y
that I
tratar
can say
de profundizar
is
algunos de
to
los
just
temas
take a
que
few
ya han sido
threads and to
señalados.
try and
Lo
deepen a
primero es
few of
la
the things that have been
responsabilidad que
pointed out.
implica
And first
hablar
is the
desde Estados Unidos en estos
responsibility that it
momentos por ser
implies to speak from the United
Estados
States in
Unidos,
this moment, for being
el
from the United
país
States,
responsable
the country
en
that
el
is
fondo de las
responsible at
condiciones que
the
estamos
base of
describiendo,
the
¿no? Entonces
conditions
asumo
that we are
esa
describing. And
responsabilidad
so I,
y
assume
el
that
peso que eso
responsibility and the
implica,
weight that
pero hablando
this
desde el
implies,
pueblo,
but speaking
los
from
pueblos
the
de
people,
Estados
speaking
Unidos,
from the grassroots, the
los que hemos
peoples of the
decidido
United
desde este
States,
espacio
that
del Tribunal
we have
Internacional de
divined
Conciencia como
from
los
this space,
pueblos
the
en
International
movimiento, los
Tribunal of
sujetos
Conscious,
humanos, el
the people
rostro humano,
in movement, the
como nos ha
subjects, the
recordado
human face,
Fede
as
tan
Beto has
elocuentemente,
reminded us so
que
eloquently,
somos los
that
sujetos
we are the subjects, the
colectivos
collective
de
subjects
derechos
of rights, of
transnacionales que van
transnational
más allá de
rights
las
that
fronteras.
go beyond
Cuando hablamos de los
borders.
derechos
When we
humanos,
talk
hablamos de
about
una
human
manera,
rights,
digamos,
we
entonces
are talking about
privilegiada de
a
los derechos sin
privileged
fronteras.
way
Uno de los
of,
lemas
we're talking about
del
the rights
proceso
that
del
go
tribunal
beyond borders.
que los
And one of
estamos
the
invocando
slogans of
también
the tribunal,
desde este
which we
espacio,
are convening
como una
from
forma de darle
this space as
continuidad
a
y
way
de
to give
aterrizar
continuity
las
and
recomendaciones y las
to
reflexiones en este reporte y en el trabajo del
to
movimiento de los
bring
pueblos
into a
por la
concrete
paz
way
con justicia,
the
este tejido que
actions
se ha ido construyendo a
of
través
the
de
movement
todas y
of
todos ustedes,
the people's
que es
movement for peace and
esta
justice
idea
that
de
has been woven
todos
by
los
all of you, is
derechos
this idea that all of
para
the
todas
rights
y todos
for all of the
sin
people
fronteras
without
y
borders,
tomárnoslo en
and
serio.
to take this
Es el
seriously.
tejido, pues,
This
que se
is the
refleja
weave, the social
en nuestro
fabric that is
trabajo.
reflected in our work.
Estos temas de
These
regresión y
issues of
retroceso, de
regression, of
externalización,
steps
de
backwards, of
securización, de
externalization, of
militarización y de
militarization, and
represión
of repression
como hilos conductores,
as
pero
conductor
también hablar un
threads,
poco de las
but
respuestas y
also
de
to
los
speak a little
horizontes,
bit
¿no?
about the
Entonces quiero tratar
responses and
de
the
hilar pues algunas
horizons.
ideas en
And so
torno
I
a
want
eso.
to try and
Primero, cuando
weave
hablamos de
together a few ideas. When we talk about regression and steps backwards, I want to underline, I think that this was shared in some of the things that were talked about, that all this has gotten much deeper and become more concrete whenever through this second round of Trump presidency, Trump 2.0. But there's not a lot of new things, which in what we've seen, yes, it has deepened without a question. But really, the regression that we're referring to is coming in structural terms since the 11th of September of 2001. When we talk about that, today in all the homes in the United States, we're hearing about ICE and what what this acronym represents as a face of terror, but still are not so aware of border control, but they were born within the same context. ICE was born with the 11th of September, and so it's not linked sufficiently enough within the United States that all of this architecture of terror, which is the same one that we saw in the streets of Caracas and the 3rd of January, in which we saw as well with the criminal threats, because they really constitute a threat from the view of international law, international rights, a threat to the rights to the free determination sovereignty of the Colombian people or the Cuban people or the Mexican people, as these acts that violated the sovereignty of the Venezuelan people have not been pointed out sufficiently, that it's the same terror in the streets of Minneapolis, of Los Angeles, of Chicago, as in the streets of Caracas. And so we really need to understand it from that point. We need to see ourselves in that mirror, and the steps backwards have come from the 11th of September 2001. It's gotten deeper with the genocide in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, and this crisis in the international order, based in capitalism as the mode of production. And when we talk about root causes, that is what we're talking about when we're talking about migration and displacement and refugees and their origin in systemic causes. So when we talk about externalization, when we talk about militarization, when we talk about repression, but also when we talk about our longings, our demands, our horizons, our resistances, and our responses and our horizons, we have to speak from there, from our demands to transform the system. When we talk about militarization, pointing out this anti-drug pretext, which has caused more than 1 million deaths between Colombia and Mexico in the last 40 years, and that we have seen in the streets of Mexico in the last days and in the last hours. When they talk about the pretext of the anti-terrorism call or the anti-narco-terrorism, we are talking about the criminalization, as we heard from our compañera Indira, in the Honduran context, or what we know is being lived in these moments in El Salvador. When we talk about these flights, these clandestine flights of our brothers and sisters of Venezuelan origin and of Salvadoran origin, when we talk about the negation of being able to seek asylum and refugee status, the denial of sanctuary status, this is what we're talking about in the roots and at the structural level when we are talking about detention camps that are equivalent to physical and psychological torture. In
ante
24
las
hours, I'm
puertas
going to
con
be before the
docenas de
doors with
otros
dozens of
activistas
other
a las
activists
puertas de ese
in the
campamento que
doors of this
llaman
camp that they
Alcatraz de los
call
Cocodrilos en
Alcatraz,
el sur de la Florida,
Crocodile
con las
Alcatraz
compañeras y
in the
compañeros
south of Florida
observadores y
with our
defensores de derechos humanos
compañeros y
que diremos
compañeras who are
no,
human rights
no,
defenders to
no
say,
vamos a
no,
permitir
no,
que
we are
ese
not
llamado
going to
modelo
allow that this
continúe
so-called
y
model
permanezca
continue,
en
that
nombre
it
del pueblo de
that
Estados
it
Unidos
continue
y
in the
los
name of the
otros
peoples of the United
campamentos
States and that the
equivalentes
other
y que se
similar
queden
camps, and that you
como se
want to
hizo con
reproduce
Secot
this as
en El
was done with
Salvador
Secot
y
in El
sus
Salvador
equivalentes en Costa
and its
Rica y en
equivalents in
Panamá,
Costa Rica and in
pero también hay
Panama.
experiencias muy ricas
But
de
it was also really rich
resistencia
experiences of
cívica no
resistance,
violenta,
civil
que vimos
resistance,
ese
nonviolent
tejido
resistance,
de
where we have
resistencia
seen
y
this
conciencia
social
en
fabric
las
of
calles de
resistance, of
Minneapolis,
conscience in the
exitosamente en las
streets of
calles de Los
Minneapolis,
Ángeles, en las calles de Chicago,
successfully
a un
also in the
alto
streets of
costo.
Los
Vemos la
Angeles and
respuesta
in the
rápida de
streets of
capacitación
Chicago
y
with a high
despliegue
cost,
de observadores y
the rapid
monitores de derechos
response
humanos.
networks and the
Casos
human
como
rights
los
observers and
mártires
protectors. We have
René Good
cases
y
like
Alex
the
Pretty,
martyrs, Renee
los
Good and Alex
aprendizajes
Pretty,
desde el sur en cuanto
and
a
in
los
Los
casos de
Angeles and
ejecuciones
in these other
extrajudiciales
cases
de
of
desapariciones
extrajudicial
forzadas y
executions and
iniciativas
forced
como
disappearances,
en la que
and
les
also
pedimos que nos
a
acompañen de
case in
este
which we've
Tribunal
asked you to accompany
Internacional de
us in this
Justicia
international
durante
tribunal of
estos próximos
conscience
meses
in
para
the coming
exigir
months
que
in order
rinda
to
cuentas
demand
Estados Unidos
that the
por
United
sus
States
crímenes
take
dentro de
accountability
las
for its
fronteras de
crimes
de
within
Estados
the
Unidos
borders of
y
the
más
United
allá.
States
Y le
and
daremos
beyond the borders
continuidad
of the
a
United
esa
States, and we will give
iniciativa
continuity
con
to
ustedes
this
para
initiative
caminar
with
juntos
you
y
in order to
construir
walk
la
together, in
resistencia
order
y
to
la esperanza.
construct the
Muchas gracias.
resistance and hope.
Increíble,
Thank you.
Camilo. Muchísimas gracias
Incredible,
por siempre
Camila. Thank you
traernos
so much for
este
always
análisis
bringing
mucho
us
más amplio
this
y que tiene que ver
analysis
con
that's so much
una política
broader, that has to
migratoria
do
reflexiva
with
a
the
nivel mundial
migration
que por
policy
supuesto
at the
lidera
world
Estados
level
Unidos,
that,
¿no?
um,
Y hablar
is led
de
by
esta
the United States, and to
externalización de
talk about
las
all this
fronteras y de toda esta
externalization of the
estrategia
borders and all
que
of
los
these
países siguen en política
strategies
migratoria y que
that
tiene
the
sobre
countries are
temas de mando
following
de un país
in
como Estados Unidos
throughout the continent that has
primordial para
its roots
entender también
in the United
parte de lo
States.
que
It's really
estamos viviendo en
primordial
este
also
momento, que es
to
el
see
nuevo
that be a
orden
part of what
mundial que
we're
quiere
living, which is the new
imponer desde
world
Estados
order
Unidos, ¿no?
that the
Entonces,
United
muchas
States
gracias por
wants
traer
to impose. And
todo
so
ese análisis
thank
tan
you for
rico a la
bringing
mesa,
all of
Camilo.
this really rich
Parte
analysis
de
to
lo
the
que
table, and
propone también
part of what is being
este informe
proposed as
que
well by this
trabajamos en
report
conjunto
that we
es un
worked on
informe que
together. It
tiene
is a
que
report that
reúne
has
información de todo un año de las
information
reuniones
from a whole
mensuales del
year
Comité
of
Internacional
monthly
de Migración y
meetings of
Movimientos de Esclavos y
the
que también tiene
binational
información de todo un año de las
table
discusiones del
of
bloque
the
latinoamericano de migración.
People's
Entonces,
Movement for
es
Peace
un
and
informe que
Justice
está
and
muy
also the Latin
nutrido,
American
no
bloc.
solo
And
de
so
toda esta
it's
parte que nos
really
dice Camilo
nourished
de
by
todo este
all this
análisis
part, all this
longitudinal
analysis,
que hizo
regional
mundial
analysis that
de este
that
nuevo
Camila
orden
named, and
en
this
política migratoria,
also
sino que además
global
también tiene
analysis of
una
this new
parte
world
que
order,
se
but it's
enfoca en
also
cuál
has
ha
a
sido
part
la
that
respuesta,
focuses
¿no? Que
on
es lo que
what has
decía
been
Fede desde el
the
principio.
response, and that was what Bede has been naming
Este
since
lado oscuro, como
the
todos
beginning. So
los lados
there's
oscuros,
this
tiene
dark
un otro lado
sides,
que
but
es
there's
brillante, ¿no?
also
Un lado lleno
another
de
side
luz,
that is
un lado
brilliant, that
lleno
is
de
full of
solidaridad, que es en el
light,
que
that is full
queremos
of
poner toda nuestra
solidarity, and
energía
where
y
we
todo
want to put
nuestro
all of our
esfuerzo.
energy and all of
El
our
informe
efforts
refleja una gran
into, and
parte de
this
eso.
report
Entonces,
really
antes
reflects a
de
huge
pasar a
part of
esta
this. And
segunda
so
parte que es
before we go
sobre
on
las
to this second
reacciones
part
de
that is about
respuesta
the
colectiva y la esperanza que
collective
se ha planteado
response
desde espacios
activities
colectivos,
that we have
quisiera
been
solo
proposed
traer
from
una
collective
preguntita que
spaces.
nos queda por
I
ahí
just
o un
wanted to bring forward
comentario
a
y quiero
question
empezar
or a
con
comment,
las voces de
and then I
Indira y
want
de
to
Bere
start to
también,
hear
porque
the voices of Indira and of
informe
Berde,
también
because
rinde un
the report
tributo a las
also
mujeres que sostienen la
gives
lucha y la
tribute
vida en
to
el
the
camino.
women
Y quería
who have
preguntarles también cuáles son los
sustained
riesgos
and also
específicos que
who have given
enfrentan las mujeres
their
y
lives
también la comunidad
in this path. And so I
LGBTQ
want to
en
ask
estas
about
rutas
the
migratorias que
particular risks
representan
that
un
women and
claro peligro para todos los que las
LGBTQ peoples
atraviesan, pero en
face in
particular para
this
las
path. You know,
mujeres
all
y
of the
la
people in
gente de
this
la
path really
comunidad.
face risk, but
Entonces,
there
si quieren,
are other levels
Indira
of
y
risk
Bere, las
for women,
invito
for
y después podemos escuchar
LGBTQ
también
peoples.
las experiencias de Camilo, Fede
And
y
so then I would like to hear from Berta and Indira about this, and then from the others
Adelante,
as well.
Indira.
Bien.
Go ahead, Indira.
Bueno,
Well,
¿cómo viven,
how
digamos, las mujeres en
how
estas
do women
experiencias
in
migratorias?
these migrant routes lived the experience well to begin with, we have to say that in that which Camilo was already naming all of these plural factors, this economic model that is violent in all of the possible ways and that seeks to take away human dignity and even to end human life. Women in their own countries, in Honduras, right? There is a struggle for the lives of women in Honduras, and there's an alarming number of feminicides, like here internally, and a lot of the women also who leave it is because of that situation, and then also here in Honduras as a country that is an origin of migration, there's those double and triple work sessions, the mother who has to bring food to the house, who has to be also take care of 1,000 things and it doesn't have time to take care of themselves. And in the migration route, these violences increase exponentially. And here I would like to share more than anything from the stories of the women themselves. And in the migrant routes, unfortunately, the bodies, our bodies as women, are attacked in extreme ways, invaded. We know that there's a lot of rapes along the migration routes, and the mothers also who face illnesses and along the way. From Central America, we see a lot of the profile of the migrants. Now there's a lot of mothers who leave with their children, and so we see now, of course, I remember there was a mother who said to me, who was telling her story, that she didn't dare to leave her daughter. And she said that along the path, she was going to protect her daughter in whatever way that she could, to be a shield, a kind of shield. And, she's saying, I mean, really literally. And she said that, she stopped eating along the route, and she was, taking rations, for her child, and in this case, her daughter. And I think this migrant routes, for us, for women, they're very, very violent. But I also would like to say that the solidarity that is found along the way, a lot of times it comes from a lot of women. And in this case, I also want to remind us, or remember all of the mothers and sisters of the disappeared who lead. Most of the people who lead these struggles, these movements, are women. And I also remember a woman and this solidarity, in spite of everything. I think we have to rescue that, of course. The solidarity of the Guatemalans, of Mexicans that help and support these women along the way. And I remember a woman who told me there's a Mexican woman who defended them from the Mexican police, and what she said is that they had defended them like a lioness. And I think this is also a show of solidarity of other women, of to place their own skin forward for the other, also gives us signals of signs of this humanity that is that sometimes seems so lost. But I don't believe it's lost, because I think that there's always, there is possible with women who are resisting, that gives us a show of hope, of humanity. And so I think that in order to talk about just a little bit about how difficult the migrant routes are, and this realities are, just violated one time and another time and over and again. And so it's something that really, really have to work on, and to put an end to this, because we know that, magically it's not just going to happen on its own. But I think that there's a lot of networks of women also who are trying to support along the way. to the extent that they are able to, because we know that there's also limits. There's presence of organized crime. There's a lot of money behind the organized crime. These powers that are truly behind this are pulling the strings, and that happens on the borders. Not just how is the person or the woman or because they don't have piety for us, but for others, there's a visa and everything. I'll leave it there. Yeah, thank you so much, Indira. And that's also a really important issue, the disappearance of migrants and how the seeking mothers also become, migrant mothers because they have to cross borders to seek out their disappeared loved ones, and yet it shows this incredible level of resilience and struggle of the mothers. Bede, would you like to add anything? Well, and a summary, just these terrible costs. I want to mention a case that happened just yesterday of two Haitian girls in Mexico who were in the custody of a public institution and together with their mother, and they died in a septic tank together with their mother because of just this lack of care and attention. They were under the custody of a public institution. They should have, been protected. And so this is, one of the effects of these policies, and it's one of the many cases that happen. And so, the impacts and the costs are very high. And yes, as re-strengthening and echoing what Indira says, these breaches that already exist in the countries of origin become cruder, and the economy and the thingification of women, of children, of the LGBTIQ population is really inhumane, and it gets normalized. And that's something that we really wanted to talk about, though, to emphasize is the solidarity, the Reds, the networks of support. It wouldn't be possible without the participation of women. And I really want to really name all of the human rights defenders, who don't have security and support, who give everything for this struggle where every day they're more criminalized. 80% of the struggle and support of migrants are women. There are also, male companions that help, compañeros who also, help support and participate, but it is primarily led by women. And so we really want to pay homage and tribute to women human rights defenders, and we are learning about how to create solidarity with a long-term vision, but we really want to give homage to our compañeras, our human rights defenders who are women. And now also Beto from Casa de Migrante can also speak to us about their experience with LGBTQ persons and communities.
Alberto, tienes tu micrófono en silencio.
Alberto, you're silenced. Thank you.
No, pues sumarme a la indignación que comparte Bere, ¿no? Este
Well,
ejemplo de
I will add
cómo la negligencia llega
my
al
voice of
extremo
indignation
donde
to
dos
Bere, where
niñas
the
pierden la vida
negligence
y como bien
reaches
comparte
such an
Bere,
extreme that two little
todos
girls
mis
lose their
compañeras y
lives.
compañeros, pues dentro de las poblaciones vulnerables, desgraciadamente,
Within the
también aquí hay,
vulnerable
además de eso,
populations,
escalas, ¿no?
there are
Vulnerables entre
unfortunately
los
different
vulnerables,
scales of
vulnerables entre las vulnerables. Y definitivamente las mujeres y la población
people
LGBTIQ
who are even more
también
vulnerable than
cae en
within the
esta,
vulnerable sectors, and definitely the
clase, ¿no? En
LGBTQ
este grupo de personas.
women
Y aquí también
fall
me
amongst
gustaría
these group of
recalcar,
people. And here I
porque
would like
sí
to
creo que de
underline,
alguna forma,
because I do
como
think that
tiene que
in
ser,
some way,
seguimos
as it has
responsabilizando
to
al
be, we
Estado,
continue
¿no? A los
placing the
estados de la
responsibility
seguridad
on
de
the
las
state, on the
personas
states,
migrantes. Y en
for the
definitiva
security
eso,
of the people.
eso es
And
algo que no
that's
vamos
something
a
that we're
negar,
not
yo
going
por
to
supuesto que no lo voy a
deny.
hacer, pero también me parece importante el que también tenemos
But
que
also
ser
seems important
críticos,
to me
no
that we also
únicamente
have
con
to be
los
critical
estados,
not just with
simplemente
the
una
states, with the
rapidez que hemos
governments, but
estado
also with
formando y que hemos
the
estado
societies
tolerando.
that we have been
Cuando
creating and
hablamos
what we tolerate.
de violencia, sobre todo sexual, hacia mujeres trans, hacia hombres trans,
When
lo
we
que
talk
vemos
about
es de única
sexual violence towards women, towards trans women,
que
towards
se
trans
vive
men,
de la propia
I,
población, ¿no?
this is something
Aquí,
that
claro que hay
we
violencia
see,
de
with
género
the
hacia esas poblaciones, pero
population.
sobre todo
There is
es una
violence towards these
violencia
populations, but it is a
que ejecuta
violence
la propia
that
comunidad
gets
y sobre
carried out
todo
by the
hay una
community
alta
itself.
violencia
And there is a
sexual.
high level of sexual
Muchas
violence.
mujeres
A
trans,
lot
por
of
ejemplo,
trans women, for
no
example,
únicamente han tenido que recurrir al
have
trabajo
not
sexual como
only had
la
to
última alternativa para sobrevivir,
go to
sino que además de
participate in
esto,
sexual work as their
es
only
muy
means of
común
being
que
able
como
to
las mujeres
sustain
también que se
themselves, but it's
dedican al sexo
also
servicio,
very
pues
common for
sufran
women who are
diferentes
dedicated
tipos
to
de
sexual
agresiones
work.
físicas
They
y
suffer
sexuales.
various different
Pero
kinds
aquí
of
tenemos una
physical and
doble
sexual aggression,
complejidad
but
y
here
es
we have a
que
double
cuando una
complexity, and that is
mujer
when
mexicana
a
trabajadora
Mexican
sexual sufre
woman
algún tipo
and
de
a
violencia,
Mexican sex
tanto
worker
física como
suffers a
sexual,
kind of,
pues
physical or
tiene otras
sexual
posibilidades de procurar
violence. They have
justicia
other
o inclusive tiene
possibilities of
una
being
red
able to obtain justice,
local
or they
formada por
have
sus
a
demás
local
compañeras
network that
que
has been
trabaja junto
created
con
by their
ella y
other
hemos visto
compañeras who
cómo
have worked
afortunadamente se
together,
han
with
formado
her, and we've
grupos
seen
de apoyo
how
donde
support
entre
groups
ellas
have been
mismas
formed
se
where
dicen y se
amongst
cuidan
the
y
women
hacen cualquier
they
grado
take care of
cuestiones
each
de
other
reglas
or give each other
para
alerts
cuidarse
in
entre
order
ellas
to
cuando
take
ya
care
están
of
desgraciadamente en
each other when
organizaciones
they
sexuales.
have when their
Eso no
security is
sucede
not
con las mujeres
guaranteed.
trans en
But that
México.
doesn't happen with
Encontramos
trans
muchas
women
veces que
in Mexico. What
están
we have
solas, se
seen is that
enfrentan
they
entre el
are
trabajo sexual
alone
como única y
and
última
they
alternativa,
face sexual
sufren
work as
violencia
a last
y en estas
resort and only
violencias pues
alternative,
son
and
golpes, son
they
abusos
face
sexuales
a
y
lot of
desgraciadamente
violence.
lo que
It's,
hemos visto
sexual
también es
abuse, it's
que
physical violence.
muchas han
And what
sido
we've seen is that
infectadas
many of them
por
have
infecciones de
been
transmisión sexual,
infected with sexual
incluido el
diseases,
VIH y
including
otras
HIV
enfermedades.
and
Pero hay
other
muchas más
um,
infecciones que
and
pueden
other
provocar
infections
enfermedades.
that can provoke
Entonces, pues esa es la
illnesses.
realidad.
And
Y
that's
cuando
the
hablamos
reality.
también
And when we talk
de
about
las mujeres, hemos visto que
women,
muchas
we
de
have
ellas
seen that
tienen
a lot
que
of them
buscarse
have had to
parejas
seek
amorosas,
part
sexuales para poder sobrevivir, ¿no?
sexual
Porque como
partners
saben,
or lovers in
pues
order to
desgraciadamente
survive,
se vuelve una
and
práctica común
becomes a
y que
common
no es una
practice,
práctica
and
por
it's not
satisfacción
a
física, ¿no?
practice
Que
for
si fuera por
physical
elección,
satisfaction. And if
pues
it was, for due
ordinario, ¿no? Si
to
una
choice,
mujer
well,
quiere
extraordinary,
vivir en
wonderful. If a
sexualidad
woman
plena
wants
con cualquier
to,
otra persona por
fully live out her
decisión propia,
sexuality with
pues extraordinario, qué bueno, ¿no?
because of
Es una buena
their own
persona.
decision,
Aquí
that's
el problema es que,
extraordinary. That's
sobre
a
todo las
personal life.
mujeres se ven
The problem here is that
obligadas
when women
a
are
tener que buscar esa
obligated
pareja
to have to seek
sexual
out this sexual partner
porque es su única forma
because
de
their only
sobrevivencia.
way to
Cuando
survive,
tienen al lado
when they
a un
have
hombre que
a
socialmente
man next to them
se ve
who, socially
como el
that's seen
protector,
as the
pues los
protector
demás hombres, tanto
by
que la
other
acompañan como
men,
de la propia
uh,
sociedad,
and
pues
also
hasta
by
cierto
society.
punto le tienen
Up to a certain point, there's
respeto, por llamarlo de
they have
alguna
a
forma,
certain respect
no
towards
porque
the
es un ser
woman,
humano, sino porque
not
al
because
lado
of
de
being
ella
a
está un hombre.
human being, but because
Entonces
by her side
obligamos
there's a man.
a las mujeres a que tengan
And so we
que buscar
obligate,
estas
women
parejas
to
porque son
seek
la
out
garantía de
these
su
partners because
sobrevivencia.
it is a
Y
guarantee
son las
of
realidades
their
que viven todos los días
survival.
las
And
mujeres, pero que al
that is
final
part of the reality that
hay
women
mucho
live
silencio en
every
esto,
day, but there's a lot of
porque
silence
la
about
vida
this
sexual
because
es algo
sexual
privado,
life is
es
something
algo que
private.
solamente es
It's
nuestro,
something that's just ours.
pero cuando se vuelve
But when it
la forma de
becomes
supervivencia,
a way of
también se ha
survival,
vuelto una forma
then it
de
also has
vergüenza,
become a form of
de
shame,
esconder esta
of
realidad.
hiding this
Entonces pasa
reality. And
desapercibida y las
so it
mujeres al vivir
becomes,
ese tipo de violencia,
unperceived that
que
women
aunque
live
no
through
se
these kinds
ejerza
of
una
violence. And
violación
although
sexual, es
there's
violento
not
que tengas que dar tu
sexual
cuerpo a cambio de
violation,
tu
that it
vida,
is
a cambio de tu seguridad,
violent to have to
pues
give your
ellas
body in exchange
comparten con el
for
grupo de
your
psicólogas
security,
cómo
and they
sienten
share
ese
with
cuerpo, cómo sienten esa
the
realidad.
psychologists how they
Pero al
feel
final
this
es algo que se
reality in their
esconde,
bodies,
donde no
but
se
then it's something
busca
that gets
apoyo médico
hidden
y
where
al
there's
final
not
pues
medical
tenemos
support
cuerpos
being
que se van
sought out, and
desgastando,
we have
que van
bodies that
provocando,
get
que esas infecciones van
worn
provocando
down, and
enfermedades
these
y
infections
que al
provoke
final, junto
illnesses,
con
and
esta
in the end,
comodidad
together this with
trabajando
this
la
mobility,
propia salud física y la propia salud
physical health
mental
gets worn
de las
down,
mujeres
mental health gets
que se
worn
ven
down.
orilladas
But
a
these
hacer
women
este tipo
who are
de ejercicios del uso de su
pushed to the
cuerpo para
side
sobrevivir.
and get pushed into this use
Muchas
of their
gracias,
bodies for
Alberto.
survival. Thank you very
Yo quiero
much,
recordar
Alberto.
rápidamente
And I want
que
to remember
este
quickly that
panel, este
this
webinar,
panel,
por hora y
this
media
this
tenemos
webinar is
todavía
an
unos
hour and a
20
half. We
minutos
still
para
have another
seguir
20 minutes in
conversando.
order
Queremos
to
dejar
continue
espacio a que la
conversing, and
gente
we
que nos
want to
esté
leave
escuchando,
space
por
for the
favor,
people
deje
who are
sus preguntas en el
listening,
chat.
leave
Tenemos muchos
their
comentarios
questions in
muy,
the
muy
chat. We
buenos,
have
muy
a lot of
positivos,
really
también
great
algunos largos. Quiero
comments
retomar
in the
uno
chat.
en
Some of them are
particular
long. I want
que
to
pregunta qué
note one
hacer,
in
pregunta Edgardo,
particular
qué hacer desde
because
nuestras
Edgardo
organizaciones para
asks
desmontar las narrativas
what
engañosas, fraudulentas, y me
our
parece importante
organizations
porque
can
tiene que ver
do
con todo esto que
to
dice Alberto,
counteract
¿no? Que es,
these
ok,
narratives. And
sí,
I think that's
tenemos una
important because,
demanda
Alberto says,
a los
okay, yes, we
estados
have a
que
demand,
tienen este
to the
tipo de
governments, to the
políticas
states that have
migratorias que
these
no
kind
son
of migration
amables con
policies, and
la movilidad, pero
um,
también tenemos este otro
they're not
problema que es
kind with the
una
people
cultura de la
in mobility, but we
discriminación, una
also have
cultura
this
del
culture
racismo que
of
tenemos que cambiar, ¿no? Una
discrimination, of
cultura de la
racism that
xenofobia
we have to
que
change, of
tenemos que cambiar.
xenophobia
Y de
that
ahí
we have to
también,
change.
pues vienen
And
las
from there,
respuestas, ¿no? Es decir, ¿qué
the
hacemos
responses come as well.
como
It's like,
organizaciones,
what do we
como
do
gente
as organizations, as
que está
people
directamente dando
who
servicios
are
a la población migrante?
directly giving service
Como
to
migrantes
the
nosotros,
migrant
¿qué podemos
populations,
hacer
and
para
as
no solo
migrants, like
combatir esto, sino
what can we
todas
do
las
to not
acciones
just
de respuesta
combat
que
this,
hay?
but
Y en
all
ese
of
sentido
these
pasar a esta
response actions
segunda
that get
parte
carried out?
del
We'll come over
informe,
to
del
the
bloque que
second
tiene
part
que ver
of
con las acciones de
the
respuesta
report,
y la
and this
esperanza.
block that
Entonces,
has to
me
do
gustaría que
with
volviéramos otra
the
vez
resistances,
desde
the
sur a
response
norte
actions, and
con una
the
ronda de
hope. And so
reflexiones
I would like to start again
sobre
from
esa
south to
respuesta,
north
¿no?
for
Ante esta
a
realidad,
round of
cuáles son las
reflections
propuestas y
on
las
this
acciones que
reality.
ya
What are
se
the
están
proposals? What are the
realizando, cómo
actions that are
funciona el
already being
ecosistema de
carried out?
resistencia
How
que
does the
proponen las
ecosystem of
organizaciones civiles
resistance
en
that
el
civil
informe para
society
contrarrestar la
organizations propose,
criminalización y las
work
políticas
to
de contención y de
counteract
miedo?
the
Entonces, pues ahí
criminalization and
estamos de nuevo
the
desde el sur
militarization and the
este,
fear?
con
And so we'll
Fede
start
y
again from
vamos a
south to
tratar de ser un
north
poco
with
más
Fede, and we'll try and be
cortos, más breves
a
para
little
poder
bit
dar tiempo
more
a que la gente nos
brief in order to
haga
give
unas preguntas y
time for
poder
people to
responder.
ask
Entonces,
some
Fede.
questions and to be able to answer.
Gracias,
Fede?
Elena. No, Camilo me hizo recordar
Well,
cuando habló de la
Camilo
crisis
made me
bajo
remember
la base de
when he
Carlos
talked
Marx,
about
que dice que la
um,
historia se repite en tres
capitalism,
veces,
and
una como
Karl
tragedia y otra
Marx said
como
that
farsa.
the
Como ven, los
state
actores
repeats
están
itself
viendo la historia se
twice,
repetir
first as a
otra vez
tragedy
como
and then
farsa
as a
y se
farce. And then
volviendo una
we're seeing
tragedia.
that
Hay
happen.
personas
We're
muertas,
seeing
hay
both the
violaciones
farce and also
generalizadas de
the
derechos humanos
tragedy.
que
There are
están
so
pasando
many
en
people
Estados Unidos.
who are dead, and there are the
Cuatro meses
violations of human rights
estrategia
that are
militar y de
happening in
Estado, la
the
nueva
United
doctrina que
States.
llamó él
And
the
the
Dawn Road, la doctrina
the new
trampa hacia la América Latina.
doctrine
Y
of
esa es una
Trump, the
preocupación muy
Dunrow,
grande que tenemos. Miremos lo que pasó en
is
Venezuela,
really concerning.
miremos
We
las
see what
amenazas que
happened
sufrió
in Venezuela. We
Colombia,
see the
Brasil, los
threats that
países de la
Colombia
región
faced,
que
Brazil,
tienen
other
gobiernos de
countries
izquierda.
in the
Y
region who
seguro
have
que los Estados
left-wing
Unidos van
governments.
a interferir,
And if the United States
intentar
is going to
interferir en pro de
interfere,
una
try to
extrema derecha,
interfere
en estas
in
elecciones que
pro
tenemos
of
este
an
año, los
extreme
vecinos
right
de
in
Colombia
elections
están
that we have this year, in the elections
y
of
nos preocupa
Colombia
mucho
as well. And we're
esta
really
ascensión de la
concerned
extrema derecha, porque
about this
digamos que
extreme right
eso siempre
because
que acepte que
we
luego de
see
5 años, como pasó en Estados
what
Unidos,
does
ahí
it mean when
ser
a
arrestado,
5-year-old boy
eso se
is
reversa.
arrested
Ya
like what
vimos
happened
esto
in
pasar
the
en nuestra
United
historia
States.
de la
We've
humanidad, no
seen
hace
this
mucho
happen
tiempo cuando pasó todo
in our
eso. El
history of
fascismo, el
humanity, and
nazismo,
not that
está
long ago.
presente en estas
Fascism,
políticas que
Nazism
son
are present
machistas,
in
son
these
políticas de
policies, which
hombres
are
que
machista.
no
They are
respetan a
policies of
nadie,
men who
mucho
do not
menos a las
respect
mujeres.
anyone, much
Son
less women.
políticas
And
que
they are
son
policies
homofóbicas,
that
son
are
políticas que
homophobic,
son
they are policies
racistas,
that are
xenófobas,
racist,
que
xenophobic,
determinan
that
perfiles
determine
de
profiles,
fisionomía y de manera de hablar
physiognomic
para
profiles, and
crear
of ways
enemigos
to speak in
internos.
order to create
Son
internal enemies
migrantes que están
that
viviendo en
are
desgracia, por
migrants.
ejemplo, hay dos migrantes que
Migrants,
están
they're saying that
siendo como
they're the
resguardos en estos
disgrace
fachos
for the
nazis de
country.
derecha que están
But I think
gobernando
that the
ahora.
disgrace,
Y
the
nos preocupa
disgrace
mucho
are the
porque, por
fascists
ejemplo,
and
en
Nazis
la
who
ICE
are
había
governing. But we're
ICE,
really
el Departamento de
concerned about
Gabinete
that
aquí,
because
y
in
tiene un
ICE and DHS, they have a
mil
huge
millones de
budget,
dólares.
these
El
billions of
FBI
dollars
tiene
of
un presupuesto de
budget, and the FBI
11,4
has
millones
this
de dólares.
$11.4
El ICE son personas que
million budget.
tienen un armamento que es
And
militar.
ICE
Se
has a
venden como
military weapon.
militares.
They are dressing
Pagan como
as
militares. ¿Cómo se llama
as
eso?
members of the military. What do we
Una
call
fuerza
that?
paramilitar.
It is a
Entonces,
paramilitary
se está
force.
creando en Estados Unidos
So the
con un
United States, you're
presupuesto 10
creating
veces, más de
a
10 veces
budget that
mayor
is
que el
more than
FBI.
10 times
Una
larger than the budget
estructura
of the FBI.
paramilitar de
A
persecución de
paramilitary
personas
structure
migrantes,
to
de persecución de
persecute
personas que
migrants, to
ellos
persecute
no
people who they
quieren, piensan que
do
no
not,
están de acuerdo con su
that
ideología.
they think are not in agreement with their
O sea,
ideology.
esto es muy serio,
That's
muy grave
really
y nosotros
serious. This
vimos
is
lo
really
que pasó.
grave, and we've
Las
seen what
instituciones
has happened.
internacionales se
The
están
international
desmoronando.
institutions
Se están
are falling
desmoronando.
apart.
Trump creó el Consejo de la Paz ahí.
And
El
Trump
chairman
wanted to get the Nobel
saga
Peace
de la
Prize,
presidencia de los Estados Unidos sigue siendo el
and
chairman,
he
líder de esta
the
institución
United
que están
States
creando
is
para
still
destrozar
like the
este
chairman of
sistema.
this
Está en colapso,
organization is
las
being created.
democracias están en
This
colapso. No es
system is
solo
in
una crisis
collapse.
del capitalismo, es una
Democracy
crisis
is
de
in
las
collapse. It's not
democracias,
just a
del
crisis of
proceso de
capitalism, it's a crisis of
representatividad
democracy and of
nacional
political
en muchos
representation
países que intentaron
in
golpes aquí
many
también.
countries.
En Brasil igual, tuve el
There have
Capitolio,
also
tuvimos nuestro Capitolio
there have
acá en
also
Brasil
been
con
coups
Bolsonaro.
in
Pero
many
ahora
other
estamos,
countries,
las instituciones
including Brazil.
trajeron una respuesta fuerte contra eso.
And
Y las
institutions are
sociedades se
bringing a big
movilizó para que las
response,
instituciones también
against this,
puedan
and
traer estas
the
respuestas
society
fuertes contra
also
eso.
had a really
Ahora
strong
Fabiola pude
response, so the
llegar, por ejemplo,
institutions
a una casa
could
de
have this
amigos cerca
response.
de mi casa porque estaba en una conferencia
And
antirracista. Estamos
I
organizando la primera
we
conferencia
are
internacional
organizing the
antirracista
first
que ya
international
tiene más de 30
anti-fascist
países de 5
conference that
continentes
already
y
has
va a ser
over
entre
30
los días
countries from
26 y
5 continents. Is going to
29
be
de
between
marzo
the
en Porto
26th and
Alegre, Rio
28th
Grande del Sur, acá en Brasil.
of March in
Entonces,
Porto
esta es
Alegre,
una manera
Brazil.
de
So
que
this is
unamos a
one way
partidos de
in which we are
izquierda
bringing
acá en
together
Brasil con
left-wing
otros partidos de
parties
izquierda
here in Brazil
globalmente
together with
para
other
pensar
global left-wing
cómo
parties
vamos
in
a
order to
combater el
think,
fascismo
how
y
are we going
llamar,
to combat
porque lo son
fascism?
nazistas, son
And
fascistas,
things they're
son
Nazis,
personas
they're
que
fascists,
violan los
they
derechos humanos
are people who
y
violate
tenemos que
human
decir que ya
rights,
empezó a
and
ser
we have
tarde.
to
Si
come
no hacemos
together
algo
before
ahora, no
it's too late, because if we don't
prepararnos y
have
no
do something
concretarnos para
together, if we
poner en
don't come together and
práctica
we don't begin
una
to put into
resistencia
practice a
contra eso,
resistance against this,
sabemos qué va a pasar.
we know
Ya
what's
vimos
going to
qué pasó.
happen. We already saw what
Entonces,
happened.
seguimos la lucha.
So we're going
Seguimos
to
en la lucha,
continue.
Fede.
We're continuing
Muchas
the
gracias.
struggle.
Y
Fede,
justamente
thank you
ante
very
todo
much.
esto, estamos haciendo acciones y vamos para
And
allá.
against all of
Vamos a
this,
hacer
we're
una
carrying
ronda.
out actions, and we're going
Tan
to
solo
carry out
este espacio,
around.
estamos de todas las
It's just,
Américas.
this space which
Y
we're
es una
in from like
representación,
all
hay mucha
over.
fuerza.
We have representatives from
Somos
all over the
una
Americas. We have a lot of
representación
force. We are
fuerte y poderosa,
a
pero
strong
hay
representation,
muchos
but
más lucha y
there's a lot
colegas
more
y
struggles, a lot more
compañeras y
colleagues,
compañeros
a
que
lot more
estamos
compañeros y
tanto
compañeros who
organizadamente como desde las
are,
comunidades, como
organized
movimientos
from
indígenas,
the communities,
dando más
who
fuerza que
are
nunca en las Américas.
networking stronger
Entonces,
than ever.
vamos a seguir con ese
And
recorrido
so we're
de
going to
acciones,
continue
respuestas,
with
ecosistema y
this
también ir
tour
compartiendo
of
a
actions of
compañeras
resistance,
y
this
compañeros
ecosystem
y en
of
las redes sociales. Ustedes
resistance,
son luchadoras y
and
luchadores
compañeros
con
who are
muchas acciones.
connected.
Entonces
You
podemos ir
are part of
compartiendo
the struggles,
qué estamos haciendo
and
y
we can
cómo
share
podemos ir
what we are
aportando, cómo podemos
doing
ir
and
sumando.
how we can network, how we
Continuamos
can
ahora,
add
Indira,
to this
desde tu visión en
resistance.
Centroamérica, en
Now,
Honduras, en
Indira,
las
let's hear from your
diferentes redes.
vision in
¿Cuáles son las
Honduras and the
acciones de
different
respuesta en
networks.
este
What are the
ecosistema?
actions of response in this ecosystem?
Bueno,
Well,
primero quizás
first,
empezar
and
recordando
perhaps would like to start out
una frase
remembering
de Paulo
a
Freire
phrase from
desde
Paulo
la
Freire
educación
from
popular,
popular
que
education.
Freire dice
Freire says that
o sea, que todas y todos debemos liberarnos
all of us should
del
liberate
opresor que
ourselves
llevamos
from
dentro,
the oppressor
un
who we
poco
carry inside of ourselves,
analizándolo con el actuar
analyzing it
cotidiana de
with
hombres y
our
mujeres y de esa
daily
violencia
actions of men
que
and women, and
hablaba
of this
Alberto.
violence
¿Y por
that
qué lo
Alberto
digo?
was speaking about.
Porque ese
And
poder
why do I say
político
this? Because
hegemónico,
this
ese
hegemonic political
poder de
power,
hegemonía de Estados Unidos que
this
hay
hegemonic
también,
power from the United
pues tiene una
States,
batalla al
it
final de
has
ideas
a,
cultural muy
a
potente.
cultural battle of ideas that is very potent, and we have to battle this as well because obviously all of this violence of the system, they want us to interiorize it and to reproduce it, and it gets reproduced in many cases, like the case of patriarchy, of machismo. But how can we achieve this as well? No, there's not another way except through processes of organizing in a popular education to teach ourselves or amongst ourselves in communities, to teach ourselves there are discourses that are being imposed, there are narratives that are not true, that are narratives of hate, narratives that take us to live in islands, and for whoever can to save themselves when it is a lie that there is a save yourself whoever you can, however you can on your own. That's not possible. What we need to rescue, what we need to take from this violent, beastly system, we can only do it if we unite. There's not another way. In Honduras, currently, there are small efforts of organizations. I hope that they flourish because at least here the social movement is also going through a really difficult stage. And why so difficult? Because it went through a really difficult time after the coup. They murdered a lot of people. And in our own, humanity, of course, like that weakens us. But there are a lot of efforts of organizations. There's, I think, the civil society organizations, especially in the issue of human mobility and trying to create connections. We should pronounce ourselves against certain conditions that are happening in this case, that the government is carrying out, but that are going to impact human mobility because they are really increasing the vulnerability, the precarity that in the country we need to prevent the privatization of healthcare and of all rights, because this macabre economic system that we have is so cruel, and all of us that we call rights, there are not truly guarantees that they exist. And so the call should be to recover and to struggle for this human dignity, for all of these rights that we have never had, that we never truly fully had, and that we have to have, but that on our own, that's not going to happen. And the report also of this gives us the hope of regional networking. That's really, really important in a block. It's true when we come together as a whole group is really strong. It's important that they know that there are people here who are making noise, who are doing something. Because as Federico was saying, the scenario is not uplifting, and we have the example of genocide in front of the cameras just on all of 2025 and ongoing in 2026 is before our eyes. It's the extermination of a population. This should be inconceivable. This is happening before our eyes, and they still say that they're going to do, become millionaires. That's just a complete making buffoons of human existence. And so we need to organize and we need to train ourselves, because I think it's going to keep increasing this conscience that they want to take us, because this political hegemony, they want us asleep. And just reproducing conducts to destroy ourselves amongst ourselves. Just that. Thank you, Indira. And it's inspiring to hear you, Federico and Indira, and with the strength of the work of consciousness building. And we're going to continue with Beto. So many actions for so many years and facing this current panorama. What are the responses, Beto? And then we will continue with Camilo, and how can we continue building networks? Well, first, I want to say that the trust and the strength are built by the people who are moving in this moment, when in the midst of the confusion, in the midst of the fear, of the uncertainty, in the midst of this process
pierdes
that
la
I was sharing with you.
la gente sigue
That when
luchando por
people lose their
sobrevivir
life projects,
y
people
sigue
continue struggling
demostrando
to
amor
survive, and they continue
a su
showing
familia, a sus
love to
hijos,
their
a sus
families, to
hijas.
their children,
Entonces, la
to their
propia
sons and
fuerza
daughters.
viene
And
de la
so
gente
the
con la que
strength
estamos
come from the
trabajando.
people
Esa
who we are
fuerza que nos
working with, this
contagia
strength
de
that
asumir que somos
is
seres
contagious,
dignos.
to
Esa fuerza que
assume, to show
provoca y
that
que
they are
mueve el
people with
entender y
dignity,
asumirnos
and
como
that
seres dignos,
moves
dignos de
us to also
derechos.
see ourselves
Y al mismo
as beings
tiempo, esa
who
fuerza
with
que
dignity, who
comparte
are
la
worthy
población con
of
la que estamos
rights. And that's
colaborando,
something that we
la
share
llevamos
with the
a espacios como
population
estos,
that we are
donde vamos
serving, to come into
encontrando
spaces
aliados,
like this,
aliadas,
and where we are finding
gente de a pie que a lo
allies, we are
mejor
finding
no
people,
está de forma
you know, on
directa
their
trabajando
feet,
con las
who perhaps are
personas en
not
movilidad,
directly
con las
working with the
personas
people
migrantes,
in
pero que
mobility
se
with
solidarizan y se
migrant people, but
indignan
who are in
y protestan
solidarity
tanto
and who are
físicamente como
indignant
de
and
forma
who
virtual.
protest
Me
both
parece
physically and
que gran
virtually. And it
fuerza y
seems
gran
to me that
resistencia
there's
significa este
a
tipo de
lot of
espacios,
strength, a
¿no?
lot of
Este tipo de
resistance
espacios
in
donde
these kinds
seguimos
of spaces,
reflexionando,
in
donde
which
no
we
nos quedamos
continue
callados ni calladas
reflecting, in which
y
we are
donde
not
la
quiet, in
indignación,
which
pero también la
the
esperanza se van
indignation, but
haciendo
also
parte
the hope
de la
become
cotidianidad.
part of our daily
Entonces,
life. And so
esta estrategia no
this
es una estrategia,
strategy, it's not a
desgraciadamente,
strategy, unfortunately,
que
that
sea
that
llamativa o estridente.
is
Es una
a
estrategia de
strident call. It's
resistencia,
a
una
call
estrategia
to
de
resistance.
levantarnos todos los
It's a
días para
call
seguir
to
luchando
get
por
up
la
every
dignidad del
day,
ser
to
humano.
continue struggling for
No
the
tenemos los
dignity
grandes
of
focos,
human
¿no? Del
beings. We don't
Super
have,
Bowl, de los
you know,
grandes
these
artistas que
big
muevan
focuses on the
estas
Super Bowl and
campañas
these, you know,
de
big
forma
artists who are
masiva
moving
y de forma
forward
global.
these campaigns in a massive
Pero
global
al
way.
final de
But
cuentas, como
in the end of the day,
comunidades,
as
como
communities,
seres de a pie, nos
as
seguimos
human
comunicando
beings,
al tú
we
por tú en el día a
continue
día, ¿no? Desde la
to
plática que tenemos con la
communicate
persona en la tienda, con el
with the
chofer
people who are
del
around
taxi,
us, with
del
the driver of the
camión,
taxi,
y me
with
parece
the
que es
worker
esta
at the
resistencia
store.
que se
And I
construye
think that,
desde
this
abajo,
resistance
desde el
that
día a
is
día,
built from the
desde
day
que
by
una
day,
persona
from
empieza
the grassroots
a
base, from
compartir no lo que
as a
tiene,
person
sino
begins to
lo que no
share,
tiene
not
con la
what
otra
they have, but what
persona,
they don't have
es lo
with
que
the other
insiste
person,
en dar
is
vida,
what,
¿no? Inclusive
really gives life,
el propio
into
bloque,
to
el propio Global Exchange, ¿no?
the block itself, or global
que hace
exchange,
conciertos, que hace
which carries
actividades
out concerts
para
and
que la gente pueda
activities so that
compartir
people
y
can
este
share.
compartir se
And this
reparte a
sharing
las
is
organizaciones
shared
que
amongst the
atendemos personas migrantes
organizations
en primera
that
línea
attend
y eso se
to
transforma en alimentos, se
migrants
transforma
in the
en
first
poder
line,
pagar el
and that
recibo de agua,
translates
en poder pagar el
into
recibo de
food
luz.
and being able
Pues al
to
final
pay
de cuentas
for
son acciones de
water
resistencia, después
and
decidimos seguir
electricity. And I
manteniendo el
think
bloque, ¿no?
that's part of how we've
Atendiéndonos entre
continued to be
nosotras
able to
mismas
maintain ourselves
y estas son
afloat,
acciones de
supporting
resistencia. El propio
ourselves,
informe, el propio
amongst
informe lo
each other.
revela
And
de manera
the
bastante
report itself
descarnada lo que estamos viviendo en el día a día.
that shows,
Es otra
what
forma de
we are
resistencia,
living in the
insisto, no es
day
una
by day.
resistencia
And
de
that is part of the
reflectores, es
resistance.
una
It's not a
resistencia de
resistance of
sobrevivencia
reflectors, it's a
y que
resistance of
nos
survival,
mantiene aquí. Es
and that
decir,
maintains us
que no ser
here.
receptores no significa que no
That would
funcione.
be reflectors doesn't mean that
Significa
it
que en
doesn't
el día a
work. It
día
means that it
y tan
is based in the
funciona
day by day,
que seguimos aquí,
and
¿no? Y
it
entonces,
functions so much that we
bien.
continue to be here.
Aquí seguimos,
Yeah.
Beto, y
Here
aquí
we continue,
seguiremos con esa
Beto, and
solidaridad,
here we're
sororidad
going to continue
y
with
esa
this
estrategia de
solidarity and this
resistencia.
sorority and this
Y cerramos esta ronda
strategy and
con
resistance.
Camilo
And
y
we'll
también
close out this
Elena,
round with Camilo
Elena
and with
licenciada,
Elena. I would
Global,
also like to be able to
estas
hear about the
acciones de
work
respuesta, de
that Global
resistencia.
is
Y
carrying out,
compártanos, por
these
favor, en
actions
el
of
chat
resistance.
para
And
que
please
también
share
nos
with
dé
us
tiempo de hacer una ronda
in
última
the
con ese
chat
mensaje de
as
las acciones de
well
resistencia.
as we
Adelante, Camilo, por
carry
favor.
out this last round of
Muchas
resistances and
gracias.
hope.
Tomando otra vez
Thank you
varios
again.
hilos y otra
Taking
vez
again
la
various different
importancia de las voces que hemos
threads and the
escuchado.
importance of the
Primero, cuando se
voices
habla
that
de
we
los
have
aportes de
listened
las
to, when
mujeres
we
y
hear
de las
about the
comunidades
contributions of
LGBT, no hay
women
que ir
and the
muy lejos
LGBTQ
para tener
communities.
ejemplos.
And
René
we don't have to
Good
go
y
very
su
far to
esposa
hear,
Becca
to
en las
see
calles de
examples. Renee Good and
Minneapolis. O
her
sea, quien no
wife
conozca la
Becca in the
historia,
streets
por
of
favor,
Minneapolis. Those of you
búsquenla.
who don't know this
René
story,
Good
please look it
dio
up.
su
Renee
vida.
Good gave her life.
Becca Good
And
ha
Becca
hablado
Good
de las
has spoken of
circunstancias
the
que llevaron
circumstances
a
which brought
básicamente ese sacrificio.
her to this
Ellas
sacrifice.
como
They,
observadoras,
as human
defensoras
rights
de
observers,
derechos
human rights
humanos,
defenders who chose
interponerse
to
en
place
defensa
themselves
de
in
sus
defense
vecinas
of
y
their
vecinos
neighbors,
migrantes
their migrant neighbors,
ante la
as they
embestida
faced
de ICE, la militarización de ICE
as they
en las
faced
calles de
the ICE, the
Minneapolis, y le
militarization, the
costó la
military
vida
presence
a Renee
of
Good.
ICE, and it
Y
cost
han
Renee Good
sido
her life,
estigmatizadas
and they
las
have
dos
been
por su
stigmatized, both
relación
of
como
them, because
pareja,
of
como
their
matrimonio,
relationship
Becca
as
como su
partners, that
viuda.
as for
Intentaron
their marriage,
incluso,
and
no
Becca
solo
as
no han
a widow.
investigado, no solo ha quedado en impunidad, otra vez
As,
la
it's not,
ejecución
the killing, the
extrajudicial de Renee
extrajudicial
Good,
killing of Renee Good is not
sino han
only
intentado
not
criminalizar
being
a Renee
investigated,
y a
um,
Becca,
and is an
definiéndolas
impunity, but they've
desde las
tried to
más altas esferas del
criminalize
poder, desde
Renee Good. They've
la
tried to
fiscal general de la
criminalize
nación
Becca
y la
Good,
secretaria de
the attorney
seguridad
from the
interna,
highest levels
las
of
han
power, the
intentado
Attorney General's
criminalizar como
office, the Department of State. They've
terroristas
been trying to characterize
domésticos,
them as domestic
literalmente.
terrorists, literally.
Pero además
But
estigmatizarlas
additionally, to
por
stigmatize them
su
because
definición
of
LGBT.
being
Entonces, no
LGBTQ.
hay que ir muy lejos en ese
So we don't have
sentido.
to
Pero
go
más allá
very
de
far
eso,
in that sense. But
no hay que ir
beyond
muy
this,
lejos si uno comienza
we
a
don't have to go
indagar
very
y
far if
entender
one begins
el
to
tejido de
investigate and to
resistencia
understand the
popular,
weave of
comunitaria en
popular community
Minneapolis, en Los
resistance in
Ángeles,
Minneapolis, in
en
Los Angeles,
Chicago y
in
más
Chicago,
allá,
and beyond,
donde han sido
where
las
it has been
mujeres
the women,
migrantes
migrant
el
women,
factor
have
más
been
decisivo
the most
de
decisive factor of
organización,
organizing,
conciencia y
of
resistencia.
consciousness
Hay que
building,
ver nada
and
más
of
las redes de
resistance.
jornaleras y
You only have to
jornaleros
look at the
y cómo
network
se
of
han
day workers
organizado
and
en
how they
estas
have
redes de
organized
respuesta
in
rápida.
these
Y
rapid
hay que ver
response networks. And
también,
we also have to
porque
look at
las
how
compañeras y los compañeros que conocemos la
compañeras and
historia de
compañeros
los
who we
movimientos de
know,
derechos humanos
the
en América Latina,
stories of
los
the
aprendizajes
movements
desde el
in Latin
sur.
America,
Las madres y
their
abuelas de Plaza de
learnings
Mayo, el
from the south,
Comité Eureka en
the
México, las
mothers
familiares de las
and
víctimas del
grandmothers of the Plaza
feminicidio de
de Mayo,
Juárez,
the
las
Eureka
compañeras de las abejas de
community
Acteal,
in
doña
Mexico, the
Cristina
community
Bautista de
of
las madres
Las
y padres
Abejas
de
and
Ayotzinapa,
Acteal in
y ahora
Chiapas,
las
Doña
buscadoras,
Cristina
el
of
grupo de
the
ayuda
mothers and fathers
mutua
of
de
Ayotzinapa,
Guatemala y Rigoberta Menchú,
and
de
the
Berta
group
Cáceres
of
de
mutual
Honduras, las
aid
madres de
in Guatemala,
Soacha
Berta
en Colombia,
Menchú,
los
Berta
familiares
Cáceres
de los
in
falsos
Honduras,
positivos,
other communities
el
in
movimiento de
Colombia, the group of
derechos
the False
humanos
Positive, the movement,
contemporáneo en
the
América Latina
contemporary human
no
rights
existiría,
movement in Latin America
no
would not
tendría
exist.
sentido
It would
sin
not
el
have meaning
protagonismo,
without
liderazgo,
the leadership, the
presencia de las
protagonism,
mujeres.
the
Desde
presence of
ahí
women.
partimos.
And we come
Si
from there.
queremos
And
pensar
if we want
qué
to think
podemos
about what we
hacer
can
y qué
do
podemos
and what
construir,
we can
juntas y
construct
juntos les
together,
pedimos
then we ask
humildemente
you
que nos
humbly
acompañen
to
en
accompany
este
us
camino
in
del
this path
Tribunal Internacional
of
de
the
Conciencia, en que
International
es
Tribunal of
protagónico el
Conscience,
papel
which
precisamente de este
there is a
movimiento de los pueblos por la paz,
protagonistic
por
role of
justicia,
the People's
conjuntamente con
Movement for
ya
Peace
más
and
de unas
Justice, together
docenas de
with
organizaciones
oh,
que se han sumado
dozens of
a nivel
organizations that have
continental,
joined at the
además de sus
continental level,
filiales
as well as
filiales en
their
20 países de América
different
Latina,
networks in over
donde
20
están surgiendo
countries in
comités
Latin
promotores
America, where
en
there are
Brasil, en Argentina,
committees being
en
born
México,
in
en
Brazil, in
Estados
Argentina,
Unidos
in
mismo,
Mexico, in the United
en
States,
Colombia,
in
en
Colombia,
Ecuador,
in
en
Ecuador,
Perú,
in
en
Peru,
el terreno,
in
que van a
the
estar participando,
territory
por
that are
ejemplo, que
going
se
to
ofrece
be
un encuentro mundial de juristas
participating in
en
a
Caracas, que van a estar participando en Santa
worldwide
Marta, en la
meeting
cumbre
of
sobre la
jurists,
transición a una
and where
economía
there's
libre
also going
de
to be
energías
a
fósiles, que van a
summit
estar
for
participando en la conferencia
facing
antifascista
up
en
fossil
Brasil, que van
fuels,
a
and
estar
there's going to be this
participando
summit in
otros
Brazil that's
múltiples espacios
anti-fascist, where
continentales y
there's going to be
regionales.
many
Les
different
pedimos que
continental
nos
and regional
acompañen
spaces. We
desde
ask for
sus
you to
países,
accompany
desde
us
sus
from your
espacios,
countries, from the different
desde
spaces that you
sus
are part of,
temas
from
y
your
sus
issues and
ámbitos en horizontes y
your
lucha, que
horizons of
juntos
struggle, that
construyamos
together we
estas
might be able to
audiencias en
construct
sus
these hearings
organizaciones,
in your
desde sus
organizations,
movimientos,
from your
desde
movements,
abajo,
from
para que
below, in order
converjamos
to
en la
converge
frontera, en
on the
Ciudad
border
Juárez,
in Ciudad
del 18
Juarez
al 20 de
from the
septiembre
18th of
y
20th
luego
to
en
of
Ciudad de
September,
México
and then in Mexico
el
City
16 y
the
17 de
16th and
octubre
17th of
para luego
October,
difundir
in order to then be able to share the sentences that are generated. The 10th of December, the International Day of Human Rights, and the 18th of December, which is the International Day of Migrants, and to give continuity to this process next year. Please accompany us to construct this international tribunal and this hearing so that these crimes are not left in impunity, these crimes of the United States against our peoples, so that the militarization and the repression of our rights not stay in impunity without any borders. Thank you, Camilo. We have run out of time, and we also wanted to see if any people have any questions in the chat. If you have questions, it is a time to share them quickly. I want to close thanking Camilo, thanking Alberto, Indira, Bere, Federico for their participation. It's really important how we're closing out this moment, and we are placing the emphasis in placing the people at the center of this discussion about migration, not placing the states, not placing the issue of migration just as a problem or as a crisis, but as being able to have this response of solidarity all together. And of course, the binational monthly meeting focuses on migration, and the Latin American bloc are two of the spaces that are generating this collective work that is trying to have a response through various different ways, through art, through solidarity, through the different spaces that generate tools in order to struggle for the defense of human rights, the defense of migrant peoples, to carry out strategies against disinformation campaigns. We had the green card, we had different moments throughout 2025 that helped us to be able to construct not just stronger links of solidarity, but also a counter narrative that helps the people to get familiarized with the issues of migration and to be able to have this pushback to discourses of xenophobia, of racism, and that comes out of the multiple efforts that are being done by carried out by Global Exchange and by this monthly binational roundtable on migration. But we're also trying to create a permanent fund that Global Exchange is carrying out an ongoing campaign all year, all the time. We're carrying out this campaign in order to fundraise to go directly to the collectives, the organizations, the the migrant shelters, the albergues. Thank you. And the shelters, the migrant shelters in the north and the south of Mexico. And so there are a lot of actions of collective response. And so I want you to follow the social media networks of Global Exchange, of the Latin American Bloc, and to be able to follow this information. And I see in the chat something about the tribunal. If you follow our social media, you'll be able to see information and to get involved. And with that, I would like to close out. I don't know, Bere, if you have anything else that you would like to say. I just want to thank you, Elena, because you have woven the thread for this report, for this process, and I want to thank Global Exchange. It's been, as we face this really difficult context, it's really incredible to be inspired, to be full of hope, to lead, to listen to all of you who are connected, our social movement leaders in resistance, and so we continue to be connected and in resistance. Thank you. And we also have a press conference in Mexico City next Monday. If you are here, it's going to be in Sencos. You can also follow the press conference in our social media. And in order to keep listening about this report, a little bit focused more on the compañeros who are part of this effort in Mexico City. Thank you very much to all of you. And we continue.
Hugs, hugs to all of you. Thank you, thank you.
Abrazos.
Thank you, hugs.